James Chen stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his tiny studio apartment in Los Angeles' Koreatown, his trembling hands clutching an expensive makeup brush that cost him a week's worth of tips. At 26, he was younger than most of his peers in the competitive world of celebrity makeup artistry, but his talent was undeniable, even if his path to success was anything but certain. Born in Taipei to working-class parents, James had arrived in America 4 years ago with nothing but a tourist visa and a dream. Where others saw impossibility, James saw opportunity. Through countless hours of watching YouTube tutorials, practicing on willing friends, and working multiple jobs, he had slowly built a reputation for his innovative techniques that blended Asian and Western aesthetics. His tiny apartment told the story of his journey. Makeup brushes were thousands of dollars carefully arranged beside packets of instant noodles, high-end cosmetics sharing space with carefully counted tip money. Each morning, he would wake before dawn to practice his craft, transforming his own face again and again before heading to his day job at a Korean beauty supply store. Every dollar he could spare, after sending money home to his family, went into his kit. His dream of becoming a celebrity makeup artist sustained him through endless double shifts and missed meals. 15 miles away, in a world that might as well have been another planet, Elizabeth Beth Walker was conducting her own morning ritual in the marble-clad bathroom of her Bel Air mansion. At 45, she fought a daily battle against time, her arsenal consisting of creams that cost more than James's monthly rent and treatments that could feed a family for a year. The former flight attendant-turned-trophy wife had spent 17 years learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Los Angeles high society, but her middle-class roots still haunted her like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Richard Walker, her husband of 17 years, had built Walker Dynamics into a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, but lately he seemed to look through her rather than at her. Their conversations, when they happened at all, centered around charity galas and board meetings. Beth found herself increasingly alone in their sprawling mansion, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, yet starving for genuine connection. Her carefully maintained beauty felt like both shield and prison, a mask she couldn't afford to let slip. Neither James nor Beth could have known that their paths were about to cross in a way that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately death. Where James saw a chance at his American dream, Beth would find a dangerous reminder of her own lost youth. Their shared understanding of beauty's power to transform would draw them together, but it would be their differences that would tear them apart in ways neither could have imagined. For James, each day in America was a delicate balance between ambition and survival, his precarious immigration status adding an edge of desperation to every decision. One mistake, one wrong move, could send him back to Taipei, his dreams shattered before they had truly begun. Yet it was precisely this desperate hunger to succeed that would catch Beth's eye, awakening something in her that had long laid dormant beneath layers of expensive makeup and social conditioning. The phone call that would change James Chen's life forever came on a Tuesday afternoon while he was restocking shelves at the Korean beauty supply store, his hands trembling as he answered the unfamiliar number. Jessica Park, one of La's most sought-after makeup artists, had food poisoning and needed someone to cover a charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel that evening. A mutual friend had recommended James as a last resort. The pay for one night was more than he made in 2 weeks at the store. James spent his lunch break watching YouTube tutorials of red carpet looks, his phone propped against a bottle of shampoo in the store's break room. This was his chance, the moment he had been preparing for since arriving in America 4 years ago. He couldn't afford to fail. That evening, as he entered the hotel's grand ballroom, his makeup kit clutched like a shield, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the wealthy patrons could hear it. The first few clients were simple touch-ups for already perfectly made-up socialites who barely acknowledged his existence. But then came Catherine Morrison, an aging actress known for her demands for perfection. James's hands, steady now in the way they only were when he was working, transformed her face using techniques he'd learned from his grandmother in Taipei, combined with Western contouring. The result was subtle yet stunning. Catherine's gasp of pleasure when she looked in the mirror drew attention from nearby guests. Beth Walker had been watching the young makeup artist's work, fascinated by his intense concentration, the way his skilled hands moved with both precision and artistry. When Catherine emerged, looking years younger, Beth felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Here was something new, something different from the usual parade of overpriced mediocrity she encountered in her social circle. Their first interaction was brief, James nearly dropping his brush when Beth approached his makeshift station, her Cartier necklace alone worth more than everything he owned. His accent thicker than usual with nervousness, he explained his technique. But Beth wasn't interested in just another touch-up. She saw something in his innovative approach that sparked an idea. Watching him work, Beth was transported back to her own youth, when everything seemed possible. Before marriage to Richard had gilded her cage, when she too had been an outsider looking in. James's passion reminded her of the girl she'd been at 28, serving drinks in first class, dreaming of a bigger life. She saw in his eyes the same hunger that had once driven her. Before leaving the gala, Beth handed James her private card, not her husband's social secretary's number, but her personal line. "I'd like to book a private session," she said, "and perhaps introduce you to some people." James stared at the embossed card as if it might disappear, his hand trembling slightly as he took it. This was it, his first real connection to the world he'd been trying to penetrate for years. 2 days later, James arrived at the Walker mansion in his used Toyota that had seen better days, the security guard eyeing him suspiciously until Beth's housekeeper confirmed his appointment. The driveway alone was bigger than his entire apartment building. He clutched his kit tighter as he walked up marble steps that probably cost more than his parents' house in Taipei. Beth was waiting in her private sitting room, a space larger than James's entire apartment, filled with artwork that he suspected cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime. But as they began to talk, the opulence faded into the background. Beth surprised him by asking about his journey to America, his dreams, his struggle. Maybe it was something in her eyes, a hint of remembered hardship, or maybe it was just the need to finally tell someone who might understand. But James found himself opening up about the loneliness of being an immigrant, the weight of his family's expectations, the constant fear of failure. Beth, in turn, shared stories of her own climb from middle-class Cincinnati, her early days as a flight attendant, the persistent feeling of being an imposter in her current world. As James worked, transforming Beth's already beautiful face, they found themselves sharing more than just beauty tips. Both understood what it meant to be an outsider looking in. Both knew the cost of pursuing dreams that others thought impossible. Beth saw in James a raw talent and determination she'd once possessed before luxury had softened her edges. James saw in Beth not just another wealthy client, but someone who might actually understand his struggle. The session stretched from the planned hour to nearly 3, neither wanting to break the unexpected connection they'd formed. Beth found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone, not even her therapist, about the isolation of her current life, the way Richard's success had slowly erased her own identity. James spoke of his parents' sacrifice, how every cent he saved went back to them, how he practiced his craft late into the night because he couldn't bear the thought of failing them. Before James left, Beth made good on her promise to connect him with her circle. But more than that, she offered to mentor him in navigating the complex social waters of Los Angeles high society. "I can help you avoid the mistakes I made," she said, and James, eager for any advantage, grateful for any guidance, accepted without hesitation, neither of them recognizing the dangerous intimacy they were creating. That night, in his tiny apartment, James stared at the check Beth had written for his services, more money than he usually made in a week. His mind raced with possibilities. Finally, a real chance to establish himself in the world he'd been trying to enter since arriving in America. Across town, in her marble bathroom, Beth studied her reflection. James's artistry had made her look younger, more vibrant, but it was the light in her own eyes that truly transformed her. Both of them slept poorly that night, their minds filled with thoughts of their unexpected connection, neither suspecting that this was the beginning of a path that would lead them both to destruction. Their shared status as outsiders created a bond that would prove far more dangerous than either could have imagined. Beth's desire to mentor and James's need for guidance were laying the foundation for a relationship that would eventually shatter both their worlds. In the weeks that followed, Beth began recommending James to her friends, carefully orchestrating his introduction into her social circle. She took pride in watching him grow more confident with each client, believing she was helping someone avoid the painful lessons she'd learned. But beneath her mentorship, something else was growing, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Their weekly sessions became longer, their conversations deeper, their connections stronger, until the lines between mentor and mentee, patron and artist began to blur in ways that would eventually lead them both to ruin. Within weeks of Beth's patronage, James Chen found himself thrust into a world he'd only glimpsed through magazine pages and YouTube videos. The Walker name opened doors that had seemed forever sealed to a young immigrant from Taiwan. Beth orchestrated his rise with the precision of a symphony conductor, introducing him first to her closest friends, then to wider circles of Los Angeles elite. His unique techniques, blending Eastern and Western aesthetics, caught the attention of aging socialites desperate for something new. Each success felt like a dream to James, his phone constantly buzzing with requests from women whose names he'd once only seen in gossip columns. His tiny apartment slowly filling with expensive thank-you gifts, and his bank account finally showing numbers that made his monthly wire transfers to Taipei less painful. But it was Beth's proud smile that he found himself working for. Her subtle nods of approval were worth more than all the designer handbags his other clients gifted him. Beth watched his transformation from nervous immigrant to confident artist with a complexity of emotions she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She found herself scheduling more sessions than necessary, sometimes just for minor touch-ups that didn't require his skills. Their appointments stretched longer and longer as makeup application gave way to deep conversations about art, dreams, and loneliness in their respective worlds. Richard Walker barely noticed his wife's increasing absences, too consumed with a hostile takeover that kept him at the office until midnight. When he did notice Beth's renewed energy, her glowing complexion, he attributed it to whatever new treatment she was trying, never suspecting that his wife's transformation had nothing to do with skincare and everything to do with the young artist who had awakened something long dormant in her. James's success brought changes to his life beyond just financial security. He moved to a better apartment, still in Koreatown, but with a proper makeup studio where he could receive clients. Beth had helped him design the space, her expert eye for luxury transforming the modest room into something that would make his wealthy clients comfortable while still maintaining his authentic style. The day he received his first celebrity booking, a rising television actress who'd seen his work on one of Beth's friends, he called Beth before even telling his parents. Their relationship shifted so gradually that neither could later point to the exact moment when mentorship became something more dangerous. Their weekly sessions became daily texts, sharing small victories and private jokes. Beth found herself driving to Koreatown at odd hours, claiming she needed emergency touch-ups but really just craving the way James looked at her, like she was more than just another rich man's wife. The first kiss happened in Beth's private makeup room, after a particularly successful session where James had transformed her for a major charity gala. Neither could say who moved first, but suddenly, his brush was on the floor, and her carefully applied lipstick was smeared. James found in Beth's arms the acceptance he'd been searching for since leaving Taipei, while Beth discovered in his youth and hunger a reflection of her own buried desires. Their worlds began to merge in secret meetings and stolen moments. James introduced Beth to the vibrant life of his immigrant community, taking her to hidden restaurants where elderly Korean women served soup so spicy it made her eyes water. They went to late-night karaoke rooms where nobody cared about her last name or her husband's bank account. Beth found herself craving these glimpses into James's world, where everything felt real in a way her sanitized existence in Bel Air never did. For James, Beth became his first real connection in America beyond the superficial friendships he'd formed with other struggling immigrants. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about the shame of leaving his younger sister to care for their aging parents, about the nights he considered giving up and going home, about the crushing loneliness of pursuing his dreams in a country that often seemed determined to reject him. Beth listened with an understanding that came from her own journey from outsider to insider. Beth, in turn, confided in James about the emptiness of her privileged life, the way her former friends from her flight attendant days had slowly stopped calling, unable to bridge the gap her marriage had created. The crushing pressure to maintain the illusion of perfection in a world where every flaw was gossip fodder. With James, she could let the mask slip and be the small-town girl who still sometimes felt overwhelmed by the life she'd married into. Their affair, if it could be called that yet, existed in stolen moments and lingering touches, neither willing to cross the final line but both aware they were dancing closer to it with each passing day. James began scheduling his last appointment of the day for Beth, knowing their sessions would stretch late into the evening. Beth found increasingly creative excuses to visit his studio, Rich's distraction with work making her deceptions easier than they should have been. The physical attraction between them grew with the intensity of a slow-burning fire fed by their shared secrets and understanding. James found himself studying Beth's face, not just as an artist, but as a man, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed genuinely, the subtle differences between her public smile and her private one. Beth caught herself watching James work, noticing the graceful movements of his hands, the intensity of his concentration, the way his accent grew stronger when he was tired or emotional. Their different backgrounds, which had initially drawn them together as mentor and mentee, now created an almost electric attraction. James's youth and hunger awakening something in Beth she'd thought long buried, while Beth's sophistication and vulnerability stirred protective instincts in James he'd never known he possessed. She taught him to navigate the complex social waters of Los Angeles high society, showing him which wines to order, which forks to use, how to turn down clients without giving offense. He, in turn, showed her a world beyond her gilded cage, took her to art shows and converted warehouses where young immigrants displayed work that would never hang in the galleries she frequented, introduced her to street food that put her private chef to shame, taught her to see beauty and imperfection in a way that challenged everything she'd learned in her years as a trophy wife. Their worlds collided in secret meetings and stolen moments, each encounter adding another layer to their complicated relationship. Beth found herself buying clothes that would blend in Koreatown, keeping them hidden in the back of her massive closet. James learned to move through Beth's world with increasing confidence, his natural charm enhanced by her careful coaching, their separate spheres beginning to blur in dangerous ways. Neither wanted to acknowledge the growing risk their relationship posed to everything they'd built. Beth's carefully constructed life in Los Angeles high society, James's rising career that depended so heavily on his reputation and discretion. They told themselves they could maintain the balance between mentorship and attraction, between friendship and something more dangerous. But each lingering touch, each shared secret, each private joke pulled them closer to a point of no return. Their time together took on a dreamlike quality. Removed from their regular lives, in Beth's private makeup room or James's studio, they created a world that existed outside of social expectations and obligations. A space where age, class, and background ceased to matter, where they could be simply themselves. But dreams, by their nature, must end, and reality, with all its complications, was closing in on their carefully maintained illusion of control. The transformation of their relationship from professional to personal, from mentorship to something more complex and dangerous, was as gradual as it was inevitable. Like artists working in different mediums, they had created something beautiful but ultimately fragile. Their shared understanding of beauty's power to transform becoming the very thing that would transform them in ways neither had anticipated or prepared for. As summer turned to fall, their careful dance of attraction and restraint began to falter, the heat between them building to an intensity that would soon consume all their carefully constructed boundaries. Neither James nor Beth could have known that their greatest transformation was yet to come, or that the price of their passion would be paid not just in broken vows but in broken lives. The first crack in James and Beth's carefully constructed fantasy appeared during a late-night video call with his parents in Taipei. His mother's excited chatter about finding him a suitable wife back home made his stomach twist with guilt. At 26, he was already considered late to marry by traditional standards. His recent success made him an even more attractive prospect to families with eligible daughters. The weight of his parents' expectations pressed against his chest as he forced himself to smile and nod. Across town, in her marble bathroom, Beth stared at old family photos. Her son's college graduation picture made her age difference with James suddenly nauseating. The boy she'd raised was the same age as her lover. The reality of their situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She'd been so caught up in the intoxication of their connection that she'd almost forgotten what she was risking, what she was taking from someone young enough to be her child. James's traditional values began to war with his growing feelings for Beth. Each success in his career felt somehow tainted by the secret they shared. His mother's weekly calls became exercises in evasion, her questions about his personal life making him stutter and stumble in ways that raised maternal suspicions. He found himself pulling away from his community, the judgment he imagined in their eyes too heavy to bear. Beth watched his internal struggle with a mixture of guilt and possessiveness, her own feelings complicated by the knowledge that she was corrupting something pure. Her protection of James became increasingly controlling. Each new client, particularly younger ones, was subjected to careful scrutiny. Her introductions now came with subtle strings attached, her mentorship transforming into a gilded cage. Their affair grew more complex as James's success attracted attention from the entertainment industry. Celebrities were drawn to his unique techniques and fresh perspective. Beth's carefully curated introductions opened doors, but each new opportunity came weighted with obligation. His dependence on her connections made him vulnerable in ways he was only beginning to understand. The immigration issue hung over them like a sword of Damocles. James's visa status remained precarious. One wrong move, one vindictive client, one jealous competitor, and he could be sent back to Taipei, destroying everything he'd built. Beth's protection was both a blessing and a chain, binding him closer to her even as he began to feel the need to break free. Their worlds, which had seemed to merge so seamlessly, began to show their fundamental incompatibility. James struggled to understand the casual betrayals of Los Angeles society, the way Beth could air-kiss someone then destroy their reputation with a whispered word. His traditional values clashed with the moral flexibility required to survive in her world. Richard Walker finally looked up from his business empire long enough to notice his wife's obsession with her pet project. His questions about James became more pointed, his suggestions that perhaps it was time for Beth to find a new cause making her hands shake with barely controlled panic. The precariousness of their situation became increasingly clear. At a high-profile industry event, James watched Beth work the room with practiced ease, suddenly seeing her through new eyes. He understood for the first time the calculation behind her warmth, the power she wielded so casually. What had once seemed like protection now felt like possession. His success, which had felt earned, now tasted like dependency. Beth's control began to slip as James's client list grew increasingly independent of her influence. Young celebrities sought him out on their own merit. Her response was to tighten her grip, scheduling more frequent sessions, demanding constant updates. Her support transformed into surveillance. Her guidance became demands. James's naivety about American relationships led to dangerous missteps. His innocent mentions of Beth in interviews set gossip blogs buzzing. His inability to navigate the complex social politics of Los Angeles nearly destroyed carefully cultivated connections more than once. Only Beth's quick intervention saved his reputation. The power shift became impossible to ignore as James's star rose in the beauty industry. His unique perspective and talent earned him recognition beyond Beth's circle of influence. She watched with growing anxiety as he began to spread his wings, her fear of losing him manifesting in increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. Richard's attention to his wife's project forced them to be more careful. Their meetings became less frequent, more rushed. The passion that had once felt liberating now weighed with fear and desperation. Beth's makeup sessions stretched longer as she tried to hold on to moments that were slipping away like sand through her fingers. The cultural divide between them widened as James found himself caught between two worlds. His parents' increasing pressure to return home for arranged meetings with potential brides made him realize how far he'd strayed from their expectations. Meanwhile, Beth's world, with its casual acceptance of infidelity, made him question everything he'd been raised to believe. Their careful dance began to falter. Steps that had once been seamless became clumsy and forced. Beth's attempts to maintain control grew more obvious. James's need for independence became more urgent. The beauty they created together took on a darker edge as the cost of their choices became impossible to ignore. Late one night in his studio, James finally began to understand the depth of the hole he'd dug himself into. His dream of success had become a complex web of obligations and secrets, each thread leading back to Beth. Each triumph was tainted by the fear of exposure. The immigrant community he'd once found comfort in now felt distant. His connection to his roots was fraying. Beth's growing possessiveness manifested in subtle ways. The client she steered away from him, the conversation she interrupted, the events she insisted he attend or avoid. Her manipulation was so skillful that he often didn't recognize it until later. Alone in his apartment, he'd replay their interactions, seeing the puppet strings he'd mistaken for support. Their relationship began to show signs of strain that neither could ignore. James's growing resistance to Beth's control met with increasing reluctance, while she responded with emotional manipulation, reminding him of everything she'd done for his career. The implicit threat in her support became clearer with each passing day. As autumn turned to winter, James began to see his reflection differently. No longer just the ambitious immigrant chasing his American dream, he saw someone caught in a web of his own making. The success he'd achieved was tainted by the price he'd paid for it. Meanwhile, Beth faced her own reflection with increasing despair, seeing not just the signs of aging she'd always feared, but the evidence of a desperation that threatened to destroy everything she'd built. The breaking point approached with the inevitability of a gathering storm. Their separate worlds pulled them in opposite directions, even as they clung to their connection with increasing desperation. Neither was willing to be the first to let go, both knowing that when the break came, it would shatter more than just their relationship. It would destroy the careful facades they built. Their separate dreams of transformation would end in a destruction neither could have anticipated or survived. The conversation that sealed James Chen's fate happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in his Koreatown studio. His hands trembled as he told Beth about his decision to confess everything to Richard. The guilt of betraying not just his lover's husband, but everything his parents had sacrificed for him, became too heavy to bear. "I can't live like this anymore, Beth," he said, his accent thicker with emotion. "My parents, my community, everything I was raised to be, I'm betraying it all." Beth's face drained of color, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish under the harsh studio lights. The words, which had hung in the air unspoken for weeks, now threatened to pull everything she had worked so carefully to build apart. "You'll destroy everything," she whispered. "Not just us, but your career, everything we've built." She reminded him of his precarious immigration status, the carefully crafted web of connections that kept him in America. James had reached his breaking point. The weight of his traditional values was crushing him beneath layers of guilt and shame. He couldn't bear to face another video call with his parents. He couldn't stand the pride in their voices when they talked about their successful son building his American dream through honest, hard work. The next morning, he sent Beth a text saying he was going to Richard's office. He said he had to make things right. Beth's panic manifested in a flurry of calls to her most trusted confidant, Sophia Torres, her personal assistant of 15 years. The woman who had helped cover countless indiscretions. Sophia listened as Beth's carefully constructed world threatened to crumble, suggesting she knew people who could handle the situation discreetly. 3 glasses of wine deep, Beth nodded, not fully understanding what she was setting in motion. What happened next would later be pieced together through security footage, credit card receipts, and cell phone records. James arrived at his studio late that night, responding to an urgent text from a client. A figure in dark clothing entered shortly after him. A brief confrontation was captured by grainy surveillance cameras. Then nothing for several hours, until the same figure left alone. The body was discovered by the cleaning lady the next morning. James Chen had apparently taken his own life with an overdose of prescription medications. A carefully typed note expressed guilt over an affair with a married woman and his inability to live with the shame. The police, noting the expensive paper and professional formatting, conducted a cursory investigation before ruling it suicide. Another immigrant dream ended in despair. Detective Sarah Martinez's instincts were triggered by small inconsistencies. The suicide note was printed on paper no struggling makeup artist would own. Prescription bottles came from pharmacies across Los Angeles. James's makeup kit was packed as if preparing for a client, not someone planning to end their life. But the immigrant community closed ranks. Fear of deportation was stronger than any desire for justice. The Korean restaurant owner who might have seen something the night James died suddenly couldn't remember anything. The elderly woman who lived next door to his studio developed selective amnesia about unusual sounds. Martinez watched as potential witnesses disappeared into the shadows, their silence bought with fear and generations of learned distrust. Beth's guilt manifested in increasingly public ways. She established a foundation supporting immigrant artists, sponsored visa applications for aspiring makeup artists, and championed minority-owned businesses. Her sudden passion for immigrant causes raised eyebrows in her social circle. Richard attributed her behavior to grief over losing her protégé, never suspecting the deeper currents of guilt and fear driving his wife's newfound philanthropy. Paper trails proved harder to hide than witnesses. Detective Martinez, following the money, discovered large withdrawals from Beth's private account, traced to offshore entities. Payments were made to a consulting firm that existed only on paper. Phone records showed calls between Sophia and known fixers in the weeks before James's death. Each piece of evidence led closer to the truth. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses revealed more details. A black SUV circling the block 3 times before parking in a blind spot. A figure matching the description of a former military operative known only as Wolf entered James's building, carrying a small bag. He left hours later without it. The timing matched perfectly with the estimated time of death. Martinez's investigation uncovered more inconsistencies. The prescription drugs in James's system weren't available at any pharmacy he'd ever visited. His last text messages showed no signs of suicidal thoughts. His calendar was marked with appointments for the following week, including a major celebrity client. Everything pointing to a man looking forward, not preparing to end his life. Beth's carefully constructed facade began to crack under the weight of the investigation. Her charitable works took on a frantic quality, as if she could somehow balance the scales of karma through donations and good deeds. Her hands shook as she cut ribbons at immigrant art galleries, her voice trembling as she gave speeches about supporting young talent. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a small-time drug dealer arrested on unrelated charges, offering information in exchange for leniency. He described overhearing a conversation in a bar about a hit ordered by a wealthy woman on her young lover. The description of the supposed hitman matched security footage from James's building. Martinez now had the pieces to the puzzle. The question was no longer if Beth Walker had been involved in James Chen's death, but how deep the involvement went, and who else might have been complicit in the fatal chain of events. The glittering facade of high society, the glitter of fame, fortune, and power, was suddenly tainted by the violence and desperation lying beneath the surface. Beth's world, once so carefully curated, was now unraveling. The storm that she had tried so hard to avoid was crashing down around her, and as the investigation gathered pace, it was becoming clear that nothing, and no one, was going to stop it. Detective Sarah Martinez dug deeper, uncovering connections between Sophia Torres and Wolf. Cell phone records placed a former military operative near James's studio the night of his death. Security footage showed him entering and leaving the building. Bank records revealed payments routed through multiple shell companies, all leading back to Beth's personal accounts. As the investigation closed in, Beth's world began to unravel. Her social circle, sensing a scandal, started to distance themselves. Richard, finally noticing his wife's deteriorating state, hired private investigators who uncovered far more than he had bargained for. The foundation Beth had established in James's memory, a noble effort to turn her guilt into charity, had become, in essence, a monument to her remorse. Yet its charitable works couldn't wash away the blood on her hands. Sophia broke first. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of her role in arranging Wolf's services, she traded testimony for leniency. She described how Beth's panic had set in motion events that spiraled beyond anyone's control, how a plan to discourage James from confessing had evolved into something far more sinister. The wealthy socialite's desperation had turned deadly. The case exploded across headlines, destroying reputations, careers, and lives. Beth's arrest sent shockwaves through Los Angeles society. Richard's empire, built on years of power, prestige, and influence, began to crumble beneath the weight of scandal. The immigrant community James had tried so hard to transcend mourned him, but they also saw him as a cautionary tale about the price of the American dream. The dream that had lured him in with promises of success, only to betray him in the end. Wolf's capture in Mexico led to final revelations about James's last hours. In a chilling account, he described how the young makeup artist had begged for his life. James had promised to disappear, to return to Taiwan, anything to survive. The hitman's testimony painted a picture of a desperate young man who never understood the deadly game he had stumbled into, and the lethal forces that had been at play all along. Beth's trial became a media sensation, exposing the dark underbelly of Los Angeles society, where beauty masked corruption, and dreams of transformation often ended in destruction. The story of a young immigrant and an aging socialite, both obsessed with perfection, was laid bare, leading them down a path of mutual self-destruction. Their shared ambition had resulted in ruin, not just for them, but for everyone they had touched. Detective Martinez's final report laid bare the tragic costs of cultural misunderstanding, ambition, and obsession. James Chen's death became a symbol of the broader, more painful consequences of pursuing the American dream at any price. The wealthy society wife who thought she could control everything. The ambitious immigrant who just wanted to make his parents proud. Their fatal connection destroyed not just themselves, but everyone in their orbit. Richard, devastated by the betrayal and the public humiliation, filed for divorce. As Beth awaited trial, her carefully constructed world of privilege and power crumbled like the makeup that had once transformed James's clients. Evidence mounted of other secrets, other crimes, and the investigation began to expose decades of corruption beneath the glittering surface of Los Angeles high society. In the end, justice came at a heavy price. Beth was sentenced to life in prison, while Wolf accepted a plea deal for 20 years. Sophia, who had only been a secondary player in the scheme, was sentenced to 5 years for her role in arranging the murder. The foundations of power and privilege that had protected them for so long finally crumbled beneath the weight of truth. James's parents, in the quiet dignity of their grief, received their son's ashes, choosing not to accept Beth's offer of financial compensation. Instead, they established a small scholarship in their son's name for immigrant artists, a legacy of hope rising from the ashes of tragedy. Their forgiveness, however, was harder to bear than any punishment the courts could impose. Detective Martinez, who had witnessed so much destruction, kept James's makeup brush on her desk as a reminder. Behind every headline, every scandal, every closed case, were real people, people with dreams, fears, and hopes for a better life. Their lives could be transformed or destroyed by the choices they made in pursuit of their American dreams. The price of beauty, it turned out, was far higher than anyone had imagined. The story broke first in Korea Daily, a small Asian American newspaper that had followed James Chen's rise in the beauty industry. Their headline was stark and unforgiving. Immigrant makeup artist's death reveals dark side of American dream. The article detailed not just James's murder, but the broader pattern of exploitation hidden beneath Los Angeles' glossy surface. Mainstream media initially ignored the story, until WeChat and Korean-language social media platforms exploded with first-hand accounts from other immigrant service providers. Their stories of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation at the hands of wealthy clients created a wave that couldn't be ignored. Suddenly, James Chen wasn't just another tragic headline, but a symbol of a broken system. Beth's world crumbled with spectacular speed. Her carefully curated social media accounts were flooded with accusations from other immigrants who had suffered similar, though less deadly, manipulation at her hands. Former housekeepers, gardeners, personal trainers, all shared stories of threats, visa manipulation, and psychological abuse. Her arrest made international news, particularly in Asian media outlets, which focused on the power dynamics that had led to James's death. The investigation expanded beyond James's murder, revealing decades of systematic exploitation within Los Angeles' wealthy enclaves. Richard Walker's company was found to have regularly used visa status to control immigrant employees. Beth's social circle was exposed for similar practices. The scandal reached into the highest levels of society as more victims found the courage to speak out. James's parents, watching from Taipei as their son became a rallying cry for immigrant rights, showed quiet dignity in interviews. Their restraint in the face of tragedy touched hearts across communities. They spoke not of revenge but of change, hoping their son's death would protect others from similar fates. Their forgiveness made Beth's crimes seem even more monstrous. Beth's trial became a media sensation, not just in America but across Asia. Coverage focused on the broader implications of power, wealth, and immigration. A tearful confession revealed a culture of entitled abuse that had become so normalized that its participants no longer recognized its horror. She spoke of other wealthy friends who used similar tactics, how threats about visa status had become casual conversation at charity galas. In response to the growing scandal, the Asian American community established the James Chen Foundation, dedicated to protecting immigrant workers in the beauty and service industries. The foundation offered legal support, visa assistance, and advocacy for those trapped in exploitative relationships. Its first act was to create a hotline where immigrants could report abuse without fear of deportation. The foundation's work revealed patterns that had persisted for generations. Immigrant workers, particularly in beauty and personal service industries, were subjected to psychological manipulation, visa threats, and emotional abuse. Their dreams of American success had often been used as weapons against them. James's death brought to light what many had suffered in silence. Beth's sentencing brought no joy to James's family, but their presence in the courtroom served as a powerful reminder of the human cost of privilege and exploitation. They declined to speak at the sentencing, instead allowing the foundation created in their son's name to become his voice and legacy. Change came slowly but significantly to Los Angeles' wealthy enclaves. Country clubs revised their treatment of service staff, and visa sponsorship practices came under scrutiny. Social circles that had once treated immigrant workers as disposable props were forced to confront their complicity in a system that had enabled Beth's actions. James's story became required reading in sociology classes, with his case study used to illustrate the intersection of immigration, wealth, and power in modern America. His death forced conversations about the true cost of beauty and success in a system built on immigrant dreams and wealthy excess. The foundation's work expanded beyond Los Angeles, establishing chapters in other cities with large immigrant populations. Their work revealed similar patterns of abuse and exploitation across the country. Each new case added to James's legacy, while ensuring his death served as more than just another tragic headline. Beth's detailed confession, published from prison, became a bestseller, not for its lurid details but for its unflinching examination of privilege and its abuse. The proceeds went to the foundation. Though James's parents refused to touch the money, their dignity intact even in victory. 5 years after James's death, his parents returned to Los Angeles for the opening of the James Chen Art Center, a space dedicated to showcasing immigrant artists and providing free beauty industry training to newcomers. The center became a symbol of transformation and hope, rising from tragedy. Detective Martinez attended the opening ceremony, keeping her promise to ensure James's story wouldn't be forgotten. She watched as his parents cut the ribbon, their quiet strength a reminder that justice, while slow, could still transform pain into purpose. Their son's dream of making beauty accessible to all was finally realized, though not in the way anyone could have imagined. The beauty industry itself underwent significant changes. Major brands established new protocols for working with immigrant artists. Immigration status was no longer weaponized against vulnerable workers. James's death forced a reckoning long overdue in a world built on immigrant talent, but often negligent in its protection. As Los Angeles society slowly recovered from the scandal, the lessons of James Chen's death remained. Immigrant workers found their voices. Wealthy patrons learned the limits of their power. The American dream itself transformed by the recognition that its pursuit should never cost a life.